Okay, now we're going to look at the surprise question. Okay, so just a quick review. What determines if we should be surprised by a source or not? Okay, so firstly, when a source says something about a particular issue, we need to determine whether it is supported or challenged by either our contextual knowledge or background info or other sources. So this basically helps to determine if we are surprised by a source or not. So if our contextual knowledge supports the source, we are not surprised, right, by what the source says. But if this main source is challenged by another source, then we are surprised by what the main source says, for example. Okay, so this is a way to determine whether we are surprised or not. Another way is to basically study the provenance. Does this source have a particular purpose based on the role of the author, the speaker, for example? And because of this role, because of the provenance, are we still surprised or not by what this person says or writes, for example? Okay, so just a quick review. Again, we're going to look at a SBCS issue about the Russia-Ukrainian war and how it impacted the global economy. So remember, it's about the economic impact of this war on other countries beyond just these two countries. Okay, so the question we're going to look at is question 2, which is study source E. Are you surprised by source E? Explain your answer. Okay, so remember this, we can use this SBCS issue to help frame how we look at the individual sources, because all the sources hang together on this particular issue. Okay, so when we read this source, we can think about the impact that the war has had in the context of this source. Okay, so we realize that, hey, this source is talking about Singapore, right? It does talk about the general impact, but it also talks about Singapore. So essentially, we need to think, what does source E tell us about how Singapore was impacted, right, by the Russian-Ukrainian war? Okay, so if you have a look at it, it says that, hey, a year ago, remember the war started in 2022, right? So now we have this lecture from our Minister for Trade and Industry, Mr. Gan Kim Yong, and he's talking to energy leaders from over 80 countries. So this is clearly your audience, right? The audience is basically made up of these leaders. Okay, so 1 year after the more than 1 year after the war, in fact, he's making this particular speech. So he says, a year ago, the world was deep in a global energy crisis. The war in Ukraine had disrupted energy supplies worldwide. Some countries even faced difficulties getting necessary fuel supplies. Following the war, Singapore's EMA has taken active steps to stabilize our electricity market. We successfully stabilized energy prices, and they also implemented this temporary price ceiling to prevent prices from rising beyond a certain level. The government also established a standby fuel facility to ensure that our generation companies had enough fuel reserves. So, he's saying on one hand that, hey, the war in Ukraine disrupted energy supplies worldwide. Sorry, energy, yeah, did I say energy supplies worldwide? Okay. And some couldn't even get the necessary fuel supplies. But he's saying that, hey, Singapore managed to do something to mitigate the situation. Okay, he says here that, hey, actually, Singapore successfully stabilized energy prices, right? Because of all these measures, it also had a standby fuel facility and enough fuel reserves. So what is Gan Kim Yong trying to say? What is his main message? Right, and remember our main message relates to the issue about how the war has impacted the global economy, in this case Singapore. So he says it is affecting a lot of other countries, but in Singapore, it seems that we have managed to tackle the energy crisis quite successfully by stabilizing energy prices and also ensuring that we have enough fuel reserves, right? Because of all these measures. Okay. So this is essentially what he's trying to say about the war's impact on Singapore. So actually Singapore was not very badly affected at all. Okay, so this is his main message. So now we need to determine, hey, are we surprised by what Mr. Gan Kim Yong says or not? So we need to now cross-refer to either our contextual knowledge, if you have any contextual knowledge or background information, or another source. So maybe you can pause the video now here and look at the other sources. Which source is the most appropriate? Which source should we cross-refer to? Remember, not all sources can be cross-referred to in this case. So you may pause the video here, have a read. Okay, so you might have realized that the source that perhaps is most appropriate is actually source F, because source F talks about something similar to source E. There is a clear basis of comparison between the two sources. They both say something about the same issue. So what is this issue? They both actually discuss the impact of the war on Singapore. Okay, they both talk about the impact of the war on Singapore. So this is our basis of comparison over here. Okay, so what does source F say about the impact of the war on Singapore? I realized that it says that global energy markets will likely be hit hard by the war. And it also says that any impact on these global gas prices means higher electricity prices for Singapore. Okay, and it also talks about, due to the increase in global electricity prices, right? What happened to Singapore? Actually, Singapore saw a huge inflation, right? Electricity and gas inflation of Singapore hit 17.2% in January. That is quite a huge number. And because of that, the cost of production for local Singapore businesses may in turn reduce business profits. Okay, so this inflation has impacted Singapore and also businesses within Singapore. So they both talk about the impact on Singapore. Are they both similar or different in how they portray the impact of the war on Singapore? So clearly you would have realized that no, they actually depict the impacts quite differently. One seems to say that Singapore was not badly affected, another one says that Singapore was badly affected. Okay, so you realize that source F actually challenges source E. And because source F challenges source E, we are surprised by source E, okay, which is the main source. Okay, so we can start by writing our assertion over here. I'm surprised by source E as it is challenged by source F. And we can now write our inference. Remember, the inferences should match between both. So I can infer from source E that Singapore was not too badly affected by the crisis, but I can infer from source F that Singapore was badly affected by the crisis. So we see over here that there is a clear match. Not too badly affected, badly affected, right? So the crisis, so the basis of comparison is very clear. How the war has impacted Singapore. Then you can go on to quote specific details for the sources. So we quote details for source E. Okay, basically we quote the part that tells us that Singapore managed to stabilize the prices. Okay. And so these are just that. Energy prices have remained steady, avoiding harm to Singapore's energy market. Okay. Whereas source F also talks about the prices, right? Because of inflation, so inflation is about the rising prices. So what does source F suggest? It suggests that Singapore's energy market was harmed because of the price increases that it suffered as a result of the war, because they had to import more expensive energy supplies from the global energy market due to the war. Okay, so you see a very clear difference between the two sources and about the same topic, the same issue. So there's a clear basis of comparison. So make sure you always have this. Okay, so this is the cross-reference level. Okay, for surprised questions, unlike utility questions, when you cross-refer, you do not need to make reference to reliability. Okay, because they're not asking you about the accuracy, they're just asking you whether you're surprised or not. Okay, so it doesn't really make sense to talk too much about reliability. So let's look at source E in greater detail. Let's look at whether we can assess or analyze the purpose based on the provenance. Okay, is the provenance rich enough? So we see that who is this source by? It is by our Minister for Trade and Industry, Mr. Gan Kim Yong. So we know this person. Okay, this person is quite authoritative figure, right? And he's saying something. And who is he talking to? He's talking to energy leaders from over 80 countries. It's a clear place. The where is at a Singapore International Energy Summit, prestigious event. And we also know that the energy leaders come from over 80 countries, so many other countries in the world. So I would say the provenance here is quite rich, right? Are we able to determine, for example, who the audience is, who this person making the speech is, and what kind of affiliations, what kind of purpose he might have? We can, right? So in this case, we can use purpose. Okay, we can analyze the provenance, determine the purpose this person might have, and based on the purpose, are we surprised by what he says here or not? Okay, so if you read carefully, you realize that, right, he's talking about how Singapore has managed the crisis very well, not very badly affected by the war itself. Okay, so, but I am not surprised by source E because it has a particular purpose. We know that it's from the Minister for Trade and Industry. So as the Minister for Trade and Industry, he wants to convince who? Make sure you choose your audience correctly. In this case, it's very clear. It's the energy leaders, right, who are attending this summit. So what is the message he's trying to send to them? That Singapore has been competent in handling energy challenges from the war, okay, to reduce basically the impact it's had on Singapore, so that, remember, in this case, the outcome must be a response from the audience. My audience here is energy leaders. So what would these energy leaders do, or how would they respond after they hear this message? Make sure there's a connection between your audience and the outcome. So you realize that, after hearing this speech, they will grow in confidence in Singapore and want to partner or invest in Singapore. Okay? So Saucy states that, so this is my evidence, okay, that ties into my message over here. So message has been competent, right, in handling the energy challenges from the war. Okay, so my evidence over here basically talks about how the government has basically managed the crisis well enough, okay, to basically not be so greatly impacted by the war itself. Okay, so this suggests that despite the war, energy prices have remained steady, thus avoiding harm to Singapore's energy market. Okay, because of the successful measures implemented by the government. Okay, so you realize that this is our PERVAMO, the VAMO and the PERVAMO. Okay, so we use purpose, you can use this same frame. And finally, we need to provide a short AP or analysis of provenance. Okay, we clearly know who this person is. Okay, so in this case, he is a senior government official. He's a minister, right? Very high ranking person. And we know that trade industry always, they look at our economic policies. Also, it's expected that he would highlight, right, the successes in how Singapore has managed crisis, especially at an international summit, right? Because he will want to portray Singapore in a very positive light, so that he, being in his particular portfolio, is able to boost investor confidence or international confidence in Singapore. It's his job. Right? He's a minister, he represents us, and as a senior government official, he would want to basically justify or say good things, right, about the policies that the government has implemented. Okay, so this particular level is basically we are assessing the purpose of the source to determine if we are still surprised or not based on this purpose that this person may have. So in this case, having seen all this, done an analysis of provenance, I am not surprised by what source A says. Okay, so that's it for the surprised question.